Now we're beginning with the top story coming from India. Indian External Affairs Minister met the families of 8 Indians detained in Qatar. S Jaishankar said that the New Delhi will continue to make all efforts to secure their release and will coordinate with the families. Now remember, 8 former Indian Navy personnel were handed down death sentence by a court in Qatar on Thursday, and they have been kept in confinement in Doha since August last year. The men, including decorated officers who once commanded major Indian warships, were working for Dahara Global Technologies and Consultancy Services, a private firm that provided training and related services to Qatar's armed forces. The Ministry of External Affairs had earlier said that it was shocked by the verdict and would take up the issue with Qatari authorities. Now, the men who were detained by Qatari ministry were 8 decorated naval officers, naval veterans, including officers who once commanded major Indian warships, and they were working for Dahara Global Technologies and Consultancy Services. It's a private firm that provided training and related services to Qatar's armed forces. And the Ministry of External Affairs had earlier said that it was shocked by the verdict and would take up the issue with Qatari authorities. Now remember, these 8 former Indian Navy personnel were handed down death sentence by a court in Qatar on Thursday. They have been kept in confinement in Doha since August last year. Now, for more on this, we are joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Now, Siddhant, S Jaishankar, he wrote on social media platform X that he met this morning with the families of 8 Indians detained in Qatar, and he stressed that the government attaches highest importance to the case and fully share the concerns and pains of the families. He also underlined that government will continue to make all efforts to secure their release and will coordinate closely with all the families in that regard. Tell us more on this.
Well, the Indian External Affairs Minister met with the family members of those Indian nationals who are in Qatar custody, and this is the first time that a top Indian minister is meeting the family members of those Indians in the aftermath of last week's judgment by the court of first instance, which of course has sentenced them to death. Now, we know that India is leaving no stone unturned to make sure that these Indians are released as soon as possible. And for that, we know that India has been providing legal aid. There is also, of course, the option of making sure that there is appeal as well from this lower court to a higher court. There is also diplomatic and political conversations. We really do not know the details of any conversation so far. Of course, there hasn't been any public announcement, but the assurances coming from the top diplomat, Dr. S Jaishankar, to the family members means that the Indian government is making sure that everything possible that can be done is done so that these Indians are released as soon as possible. But essentially, we know that when it comes to this case goes back to August of last year. And since then, India has been able to get a consular access for many of these Indians. But which way the case goes is something that is closely awaited. Now, we really do not know the charges pressed by the Qatari side, and there is a lot of opacity and non-transparency when it comes to this case. In fact, nobody has seen the judgment, at least what is the judgment which has been announced by the Qatari court.
Sure, Siddharth, and a shocking verdict, in fact, of death penalty to 8 decorated Indian officers by Qatar. And as you mentioned, that the charges against the Indian nationals were not made public.
Well, correct. Nobody knows the charges against them. What are the charges which are being pressed by the Qatari side? But essentially, this is a development that India is closely monitoring. And the meeting between the Indian External Affairs Minister and the family members shows the priority the Indian side is giving to make sure that these Indians are released. Now, essentially, when it comes to the entire case, it could take some time. And this is in the legal process of say a different country, which is Qatar in this case. So a legal process can take some time, but of course India will be making sure that it uses its diplomatic and political means to make sure that there is an early release of these Indian nationals, which is something that the Indian government has time and again talked about.
Sure, Siddhant, thank you for giving us those updates. Thank you for joining us.